All right, folks, this is the one and only Jack Antonio on the line for Do You Know Jack Radio Show, coming at you from Northern Canada, the land of the midnight sun. But of course, we are now slowly slip sliding into autumn. And the darkness is replacing the light. And I'm waxing philosophical, trying to impress my next guest because he is a critically acclaimed author and longtime industry insider, and a guy that I've known for a while but never actually spoken to on the phone. I've got Philip Freeman on the line with me today. And Philip, I am just definitely totally stoked and honored to have you on Do You Know Jack Radio Show today, man.
Yeah, no, it's great to be here. Like you said, I mean, we've known each other for probably close to a half dozen years, never spoken before.
Yeah, now when I knew you, you were involved in the office of Roadrunner Records, I think maybe in the new media department, I want to say, along with guys like Jeremy Rosen and Johnny Satterley and Randy Reiser, probably. All of those guys, though, are long gone from Roadrunner now.
Yeah, all of us, we conducted a noble experiment which eventually blew up in our faces, basically.
You're speaking of the ill-fated submit your own demo, sign me to roadrunnerrecords.com endeavor.
Yeah, and just the Roadrunner new media experiment in general, because they had a really cool idea, which I'll explain to your listeners. Basically, sure. If you go to your average record label website, it's like a list of the artists, a list of the albums that are currently out, maybe some tour dates, maybe a link to a web store, stuff like that. Mm-hmm. Roadrunner's idea was to turn their website into an editorial destination with interviews with the bands, exclusive video, photo galleries from the recording studio, all kinds of really cool content. And I was brought in to kind of curate that content because I had been a music journalist for years and years. Mm-hmm. And so I knew metal, I knew the rules of journalism, I could write, I knew how to interview people and all that sort of stuff. So they brought me in to kind of run the website. And for a couple of years there, from 2011 to 2014, basically, that's what I did. I interviewed Roadrunner's bands. I went to the shows and took pictures. I ran contests, did all kinds of cool stuff. We started a podcast. We did a million things. And then at a certain point, they decided, after Roadrunner had been swallowed by Atlantic Records, mm-hmm. which is what it is now. It's now basically an imprint of Atlantic / Warner Music. They decided that was no longer sort of getting the job done from a marketing perspective, and so they took it apart. I mean, we had this incredibly elaborate website, but by the time, shortly after I left, it became like a one-page Tumblr. And now they're on social media and doing Twitter and Instagram content and stuff like that, and going heavy into email marketing and all that sort of good stuff. But the idea that you would go to roadrunnerrecords.com to see a video interview with Trivium or something, those days are over.
Yeah, well, now you kind of, just a few minutes ago, you said it was a wonderful experiment that blew up in your face. I mean, like, how did that just, why did the label not go for that? Because, I mean, to me, and now I'm old school, so maybe that's why, but to me, that sounds like an awesome thing. And I remember personally going to the website to check out content myself. So, I mean, why did it get so dismantled?
I don't know. I would have to put it to the guy, the guy who was running the label was, it was his decision. The label manager was not really a metal guy. He was more of a pop punk alt rock kind of a guy, because he also ran the label Fueled by Ramen, which put out like Panic at the Disco and mm-hmm. Bands like that, and extremely successful, great stuff, and I mean, they had Paramore, they had all these big acts, and they had a very different sort of grassroots marketing approach, which worked very well for them. And I think they wanted to push in that direction and see if that could work for the metal scene. And I'm not sure, honestly, whether it did or not, because I kind of drifted out of that scene when I, left Roadrunner. So I can't say, it fell apart. They failed without me. I would never say anything like that because I don't know. I think they're doing pretty well. They're still around.
Yeah. Well, yeah, Trivium is still with them, but I know that, there was bands that when Monty left, there was sort of a bit of an exodus there as well. I mean, that's an entirely different discussion, I suppose. But you let go one of the greatest A&R metal guys of all time, that's a questionable move in and of itself.
Oh yeah, and he picked up some of the biggest acts. I mean,
they went to
working
Nuclear
with Machine
Blast
Head now.
Yeah,
exactly. He went over to Nuclear Blast, and now he's working with Opeth. He's working with Machine Head. He's working with Soulfly. It's some of the iconic Roadrunner bands are now Nuclear Blast bands.
Yeah.
So what are you going to do?
Yeah. Well, now here's a question, and you can answer it however you want, but I mean, were you there in the Roadrunner offices the day that Monty was given his pink slip, and what was the reaction around the room at the time?
I was, and the reaction was pretty much just kind of shock. Like, what? How can you, let go of this guy who basically was the label?
Yeah.
I mean, he was there in the beginning. He signed so many bands. I mean, he brought in Sepultura. He brought in all these other bands that made Roadrunner what it was, when they were originally like a super underground metal label. Monty was that guy.
Yeah.
And so to let him go seemed baffling to me. But at the same time, I kind of think metal has changed a lot, and it's not a monoculture the way it was in the 80s and 90s, in the sense that there are so many bands out now and so many tiny little labels and other ways to get your music out there.
Yeah.
That a label like Roadrunner doesn't have that taste-making, scene-dominating role the way it once did, and neither do any of the other labels like Century Media or Metal Blade or even, Nuclear Blast or Relapse. Good as they are at doing what they do, each one of them is just pushing a half dozen or a dozen bands, and there's nobody that's clearly ahead of the pack anymore. Because honestly, I mean, the real truth of it is that there's never going to be another Judas Priest. There's never going to be another Iron Maiden. There's never going to be another Metallica. The idea of a metal band blowing up and going multi-platinum or what have you. I mean, shit, there's never even going to be another Korn.
That's a sobering comment right there. Oh my God.
Those days are gone.
Yeah.
The last huge metal bands now are probably like Disturbed and Five Finger Death Punch and stuff like that. I mean, Disturbed is really, and Disturbed is like weirdly low profile, but every time they put a record out, it goes to number one.
Yeah.
Every Disturbed album, and there's like 5, 6 in a row, have hit number one on the Billboard charts in the US. So they're the big metal stars of right now, in a way. But I think they're on hiatus or something. So anyway.
Yeah. Well, yeah, and you're seeing like a lot of these, big festivals that have, a bunch of slightly higher than mid-level bands all play at the same time. Like, I was surprised. Like when I saw Sevendust in Edmonton, I thought, looking at their social media imprint and, their Facebook likes and followers and all that, I thought they would be way bigger, but they were playing, I don't want to say like a small venue, but I mean, it was like a bar that could maybe hit or fit
maybe 1,000 people tops, like standing room only. And then when Trivium came, I thought they would be playing a pretty decent sized venue too, but it maybe the venue that they were in could hold 600 people tops.
Trivium is a great example. Okay, now they're a really good band. They're tremendously talented.
Oh, I love them.
Really, really, really super nice guys. I mean, I used to, Matt and Paulo were two of my favorite artists to deal with when I was at Roadrunner. you know, because I could just email them and ask for something, and they would spit it right up. You know, they loved communicating with fans. They loved doing the online thing. They were fantastic to work with, and they're as big as they're ever going to get, in my mind. I mean, they tried really hard, I think, within Waves to kind of break through and reach a new audience, and it kind of worked. Like, they played Ozfest, they did big venues, you know, stuff like that. Then they did it again with Vengeance Falls when they had David Draymond from Disturbed produce the album in the hopes that it would cough up big radio hits.
Yeah.
And it kind of did. I mean, they had some really good songs, you know, but they never quite broke through in that way. You know, they're not a band that writes radio hits, so it's very difficult for them to get any bigger than they are. And then the next album, Silence in the Snow, I didn't really like it that much. I thought it was too metal. You know, it was like a step backwards for them in a way. And I'm very excited about the new one because the two songs that I've heard have both been great, much better than anything I heard from Silence in the Snow. So I'm really hoping that they get some kind of lucky break. But right now, it seems to me like they're one of those bands where in the U.S. and in North America, they're kind of as big as they're going to get. And then over in Europe, they're going to go over and headline festivals in Germany and stuff like that.
Yeah.
I just hope it doesn't get so skewed that they become like Manowar, where, you know, they go over to Germany and have their own friggin' festival, and then they come back here and they're doing club gigs, you know.
Yeah.
But
I don't want to dwell on this a whole lot, but I mean, was the sign me to roadrunnerrecords.com, you know, submit your own demo website and you know, an attempt by Roadrunner to try and capture that whole independent kind of social media kind of feel that seems to be so prevalent, like bands trying to, you know, make themselves and, you know, the whole 9 yards? Like, were you trying to capture some of that by putting something like that forward?
Well, I mean, it was well intentioned, and we did legitimately want to find bands that would be worth signing. I mean, as a matter of fact, one band did wind up getting signed to Roadrunner through the Australian label. It was a legitimate attempt, but you know, then there wasn't that much push behind it.
Well, did it threaten the A&R guys? Like, did they feel like the website maybe was doing their job, and is that why the guys, like, because there was supposed to be an A&R presence on the website, but you know, in the year and change that I was on it, they didn't seem to be around a whole lot. It seemed to be mostly you know, the new media guys like Johnny Satterley and yourself were doing a lot of the brunt work in that regard, the grunt work.
Yeah, I mean, there was definitely a lack of buy-in from A&R, but that was mostly because those guys are super busy doing, you know, their other stuff. I mean, they're, you know, going out to clubs and chasing bands, you know, and stuff like that. I mean, I know Dave Rath, the guy who's still head of A&R over there, he's meeting with people every single week. I mean, the other day I saw something really cool that I thought would be a good fit for Roadrunner. And I emailed him and I said, "Hey, have you heard of this? This thing is really cool." And he's like, "I had that guy in the office last week." So
steps ahead of you, buddy.
Yeah, Dave Rath is on the case.
Yeah.
He's not screwing around. He goes out all the time, checks things out, hears from people. He has like a network of scouts. He's like the guy on Game of Thrones, you know, who has like a network of spies everywhere.
The little finger of the metal world.
Basically, yeah.
Well, now, Phil, in my opinion, like, you know, one thing that's frustrated me about Roadrunner just in recent years was that there was a time when Mark Abramson was the product manager. I think that's what his title was. And it seemed as though the bands were more readily available for interviews and media requests. But since Mark's left, it almost seems like the well's dry in that regard. I mean, I haven't actually got a Roadrunner interview since Mark left, as a matter of fact.
Yeah, I feel like Mark was another one like Monty who had decades of experience, had the network in place, knew who everybody was, and had dealt with them for years and years. I mean, he was a hands-on promotion guy. He used to like drive the artists to the interview, for radio and stuff like that. He was absolutely that guy. And now I don't think that, there's anybody over there doing that anymore. But by the same token, it's a very different radio environment now, I think, than it was even a few years ago. I mean, I can't really speak to it myself because I will confess I never listen to the radio, but I know out in the middle of the country, they actually have rock radio stations. And, in New York and New Jersey where I live, they do not.
Yeah.
But out in middle America, there are rock radio stations that sponsor festivals and stuff like that. And Mark was all over that stuff. He used to go to Rock on the Range and, Rocklahoma and all that kind of thing and make sure that Roadrunner had a presence at that stuff. And I genuinely don't know if that's still the case.
Well, now all of this insider knowledge, though, explains how you can write a book which is entitled 50-Foot Drop. And just from, reading the, first 40 or 50 pages, you can definitely tell there's a tone of industry knowledge about it, just in how, some of the early events have been described. I mean, what was the inspiration for writing this book? And you can even give a brief synopsis or summary of it just for the listeners, because I'm sure you'll do a much better job than me.
Well, basically the book is a crime novel,
mm-hmm.
and it's set in it's sort of set half in the music industry and half in the world of the New Jersey East Coast Mafia, and yet there is no crossover between the music industry and the Mafia in my book, which some people may find hard to believe, but it's a literary conceit.
Uh-huh.
Anyway, basically our hero, quote unquote, is a rock musician who's in a mid-sized band, and they get into a really bad bus crash, and the members of the band are all injured to varying degrees, and to enough of a degree that they can't continue touring, they can't make any money. So he's stuck lounging on his mother's couch and just sort of brooding. And he falls in with a bad crowd and winds up involved in like a robbery and a lot of other bad stuff. Things go bad. And the original inspiration for it was actually the bus crash that happened to Baroness back in 2012.
Mm-hmm.
Because I was thinking about what happened to those guys and how not only did it really screw with their career, because they were just about to tour in support of their double album, Yellow and Green, when, they were starting the tour basically, and their bus crashed and they canceled all the dates. The guy was in the hospital for however many months because his arms were, shattered. And by the time the whole thing shook out, half the band quit, presumably to go back and have regular guy lives, rather than, try and gamble on being musicians. So it made me think, okay, how would that, that's a big impact on your life. That wrecks everything. And so how do you recover from having your whole life fall apart that way? And so then, I transformed that into the inspiration for, a crime novel. But I also brought in a certain amount of, like you say, industry knowledge of marketing and how bands are pushed and what a record label would want from a band that couldn't tour or would, or whatever, stuff like that. So, there are no stories in the book that are true or loosely disguised or anything like that. I mean, I made it all up, but so there are no stories in the book that are thinly disguised incidents that really happened or anything like that. But but at the same time, I think it provides a fairly accurate portrayal of how the music business actually works on a certain level and what the economics of being in a mid-sized band really are.
Now, just dialing this back a bit, though, apart from your industry knowledge, I mean, you also have a lot of experience as a writer, and one of the things that I've always found pretty amazing is you're kind of a renaissance man, because you also edit a weekly, I think it's maybe a weekly blog on jazz related subjects called Burning Ambulance, and then of course you also put out a book. It looks like back in maybe 2006, I want to say, and it was on the Miles Davis infamous fusion years. So,
Yeah.
I mean, you really have to know your stuff to be able to put out anything on Miles. I have to say much respect, and I actually kind of want to check that book out now.
Yeah, I did a book on 2005, 2006 on Miles' electric stuff, and not just the fusion years, but actually also when he came back in the 80s. It's basically everything from 1968 to the end of his life, and because I feel like the 80s
Bitches
albums,
Brew, starting with around Bitches Brew and then getting all the way up.
Yeah, exactly, and then going all the way up to the
Doo-bop.
you know,
Do you talk about doo-bop?
I do, and I could actually make an argument for doo-bop if you excise the tracks that actually have rappers on them. The rest is like a pretty decent 6-song kind of jazz trip hop EP.
Mm-hmm.
It's actually not terrible music, but so yeah, I did that. Burning Ambulance is a site that I've been running since 2010. I publish stuff when I have stuff to publish, which usually is once or twice a week. Sometimes I let some time go by before posting anything else. And yeah, it covers the things that I like, which is jazz, some death metal, some, other stuff. This week, actually, just today, I published a review of the new Mercor album, which I like.
Actually, I saw that. Not that I've been stalking you, but
yeah, I like that record. It's I like all her records. She's really interesting, and I don't really care whether she's real or whatever. There was that whole thing of like, oh, she's not really some recluse living in a Norwegian forest, so we can't take her seriously.
Yeah.
That's all insanity to me.
You've also kind of dabbled in writing a little bit about free jazz, which off and on I've kind of been able to dig here and there, and you speak about death metal. I mean, the drummer from Napalm Death was in a group with John Zorn, which I thought I've heard a little bit of that, and I was pretty amazed. But I mean, I guess it shouldn't be surprising that there are metal musicians out there that have legit jazz chops, but like Cynic, for instance, but I mean, for whatever reason they fall on the metal end of the spectrum, and they made their living there as opposed to the jazz end of the spectrum.
Yeah I mean, I saw a group called Blade Runner years and years ago, which was John Zorn and Bill Laswell and Dave Lombardo from Slayer. So I mean,
yeah,
it's that was an insane gig. So
Do you think it's unfortunate maybe that a talent like Dave Lombardo is maybe pigeonholed into the Slayer thing, that because he's capable of so much more, or what's your opinion there?
I interviewed him once, and we had a really interesting conversation about that. And what he told me that I thought was really fascinating was that when Slayer was playing live with him there, they had him in their monitors, so he was basically driving that band.
Yeah,
so he was the de facto leader of Slayer. I mean,
wow.
On paper, Kerry and Tom are the leaders of Slayer, but when they were on stage, it was Lombardo's band in a way, because he was driving it, which to me explains a lot about why they don't sound nearly as good without him. I mean, the Boss Staff albums are just not as good, period.
Mm-hmm.
But even the weakest of the albums with Lombardo, and I'm a guy who actually really likes Christ's Illusion and World Painted Blood. I think they're good records because they just are so much better than the stuff that, that they did without him.
Yeah.
The thing that really bums me out now, honestly, is hearing Lombardo do stuff like this thing, Dead Cross, that he's got with Mike Patton.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if you've heard that, but it's a terrible, terrible record.
To be honest, I have it. I got it from, whatever publicist or label sent it to me. To be honest, I can't even remember. I get so much stuff all the time. But I haven't really, sunk my teeth into it. I just kind of was like, oh, this is that Dead Cross band with Dave Lombardo in it. I should check this out one of these times. And I haven't really ever got around to it.
It's awful. I mean, he's playing really generic sort of hardcore blast beats, and Patton is patenting all over the place, and it's just it's very, very bad. So, you know, and it's produced like shit on purpose to sort of, you know, I'm sorry if you can bleep me.
You can go ahead and swear however much you want.
So yeah, it's a terrible record, and it depresses me that he's doing that. And also, I think he's also played for the Misfits and stuff like that at live shows. So it's just like money gigs are, you know, the bane of a serious player's existence.
Yeah.
But it's the case in jazz too. I mean, real hardcore, challenging music is challenging. So there's only a couple of dozen people in any given town that actually want to pay money and put up with that.
Well, you're certainly in the right place for checking out jazz. I mean, New York City is kind of the epicenter of that sort of thing. Maybe I don't know what the Paris scene is like, but I mean, I know, or maybe like Amsterdam in there. Maybe those are the three epicenters of jazz. I can't think of any other cities that would, you know, perhaps be, you know, promoting jazz more than those.
Yeah. I mean, there's a lot of good cities for jazz in Europe, honestly. I mean, this past December, I was at an amazing festival in Helsinki, of all places.
Oh, wow.
And, it was really cool. It was, it's called the We Jazz Festival, and they run it every year. And one of the things that they do really well is book shows in unorthodox venues. So some of the performances I saw were in art galleries. There was a whole night of shows going on in a decommissioned insane asylum that, you know, where people used to be residents back in the 19th century, and now it was just kind of like a public venue.
Wow.
So yeah, very, very, very cool. And Helsinki is a fantastic city also, just in general. So if you ever get a chance to go to Finland, by all means do it. They're incredibly nice people. I got to eat reindeer. You know, it was really cool.
Well, listen, man. I think I referenced this, you know, when we were just chatting on Facebook a little bit. But you know, that this is one of maybe my last show before I take a really you know, decently long hiatus. So I definitely appreciate you, you know, coming on today just to talk to me about all things Philip Freeman.
Absolutely, man. It's been fun. You know, I usually on the other end of the interview thing. So it's, you know, it's fun to occasionally have someone wonder what I think.
Well, now I know you were kind of, you know, in on all of that early weird Jack Antonio crap so many years ago. I mean, what was your impression of myself back then? Do you think this crazy guy would have been able to do things like interview Gene Simmons and, you know, countless Korn and Def Leppard interviews? You know, did you think this crazy Canadian guy had it in him, or what?
No, man. I think this is great. I'm glad you were, you know, I'm glad you've been able to, you know, do it. I mean, honestly, it's like, it's all about just hustling. I mean, I'll be honest with you. That's how I made it, you know, 21 years into a career as a music journalist. I mean, I barely have a high school degree. I didn't go to college for journalism. I didn't do anything. I just happened to be good at writing and stumbled into some opportunities. Like literally I was writing for a New Jersey weekly newspaper and pestering the editor of Alternative Press magazine, Jason Pettigrew, like, come on, you got to let me write for you. You got to let me write for you. You know, just pestering him all the time. And one day in 1997, he called me up and said, will you interview Godsmack so I don't have to? And I said, yes, I will.
Amazing.
And I've been working ever since.
Yeah, I was interviewing a Canadian artist several years ago now. Her name is Jan Arden. You don't necessarily have to know who that is. She's big in Canada, and she told me persistence is bigger than talent. And I think that's, you know, truer words have never been spoken about the music business or you know, a lot of things in life. Really, it's kind of about who you know. And I mean, obviously, you've got to have a little bit of talent, but it's just about climbing that ladder. And I've always seen the music industry as just a one step at a time deal, and using what you did, you know, before to build on, you know, and build on what you're trying to eventually get to. And I spent, you know, 5 years building towards a Kiss interview with one of the major players, and I finally got all the way up to that point. And now I've talked to Gene twice, and I'm not name dropping to impress you or any of my listeners or anyone out there who might give, you know, a single ounce of shit. I'm just saying, like, I did that by building slowly but surely and pestering people and getting to know all the people in being in the right place at the right time and luck and all of that other, all of that stuff all combined.
If anybody is listening to this that wants to break into music journalism, I will give one piece of solid advice. What editors really want more than anything else is for your copy to arrive clean and on time. Never blow a deadline and never promise something you can't deliver. If you say, I want to interview so-and-so, you should have that interview available to you, and that's it, really. I mean, do solid work and prove yourself to be reliable, because honestly, I've been a writer and I've been an editor. I edited Metal Edge. I edited a couple other magazines. Editors don't want to hear from an erratic, quote unquote, genius. They want to hear from the guy who's going to have copy ready every issue.
Yeah.
So be that guy. For 21 years, I've been the guy whose copy arrives with no typos and no egregious factual errors, and it arrives on deadline, if not earlier. That's who I am. And that's what you got to be if you want to make it. You have to be reliable before anything else.
Well, listen, man, we've been talking for a while. I do really appreciate your time. And, the book is called 50 Foot Drop, and it is available on Amazon.com. I'm not sure Amazon.ca, though. Not entirely sure
yes,
there.
Absolutely.
It is?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Yes, physically and for Kindle.
Yeah, well, there you go. And I mean, do you have a website where you peddle your books too? I mean, are you going to make more money doing that?
I do, yes. I have my website is philipdfreeman.com.
All right, man. Well, I am definitely going to get my head back down and finish out this book, and especially now that I've had a chance to have a lengthy conversation about it. And like I said, I am deeply honored that we were able to have this conversation today, man. I definitely appreciate it. And I appreciate everything that Roadrunner has done for me, especially in the early years where, nobody knew me from shit, really. I mean, you could have called me Jack Shit, let alone Jack Antonio. Maybe I should be called Jack Shit. I don't know. Anyways, man, we'll talk to you. We'll talk to you hopefully soon, and don't be a stranger, eh?